All right, another good morning at the fellowship. Happy to welcome Alexis Phillips here. I've been seeing her a lot this last year as I've been sort of stewarding the fellowship, and she showed up to our live breakfast at Dad's with Marvin Charles. And then when we were at the 17th Ave house, she was there coming in on her computer. And as you see right here, she's working with a lot of young people, and we're really happy to be doing more with Centered. We also sat together at the big evening banquet that Al Arisman talked about a couple weeks ago, that he's doing a lot of good stuff with Common Good Seattle, and she's involved in there too. So we as a fellowship have a common history going back to that meeting in 1935, where Abram Brady got together some leaders of the city to pray, just civic leaders, not pastors or anything. A lot of those guys were believers, but didn't even have a church, and just started coming together and praying for the city. And I think saw some other, you have some other colleagues here. Looks like the Gustafsons might have showed up. All good stuff, fun times. One big family. I love how you guys always just call people family and friends. So I'm just, I won't spend too long here, but very happy to have you join us, Alexis, as always. Happy to hear some of your story today. So take it away.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and we're all part of the same family. And when I read that I was the speaker, I'm like, I think I'm just the sharer today. Kind of imagining.
I have started to try to say that. Yeah, people are sharing that.
Yeah, I'm kind of imagining us sitting around, a table, enjoying a conversation together. And so feel free to, chime in. It doesn't have to just be me sharing at you. But I have a question before we start, because I've not joined in your prayer time. I'm curious, do you usually focus on praying for the, emerging generation and youth, or was that just how things moved today?
That came up a little more than some days, but some days it's sort of, we pray around, different groups or leaders in the city. We prayed a lot for healthcare workers over the last couple of years. And of course, all the politicians running the city and by name, Bruce, our mayor, and governor, and teachers. We're often praying for educators. Yes, all kinds of groups, sometimes by name and sometimes just whatever's on our heart.
Well, as Ben asked, when I said, well, what would you want me to, share about? And he said, stories of grace. And so that could take many different ways, right? And so I do have stories of grace to share, as we all do. And I'm going to start with this by sharing a snapshot of one person's life in their childhood and kind of young, moving into their college years. Born to teenage parents who were not married, the baby's dad went to war 6 weeks after she was born, and the single teen mom was left behind to provide for the baby on her own. 2 years passed, and the girl's dad returned from war. And in an attempt to do what was best for the little girl, he married the mom. The parents loved the girl and worked hard to provide for her, but there were many problems. There was an affair, a failed business, various addictions, including alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, jail time related to the drug-related offenses, a divorce, borderline poverty. In the middle of all this, you have the girl growing up into a teenager. She was curious about God. She wondered about him, but really had no one to talk to about such things, and certainly not at home. And God just was never, ever discussed. When she was 15, she met someone about 10 years older than her, and this more mature woman became the teen's trusted friend. And eventually the more mature woman grew to love the teen so much that she shared her own family and extended friends with her. And that extended family invited this young woman to live with them. They had 3 of their own daughters who were about 8, 10, and 12 at the time. And that entire family welcomed the young woman into their home like another daughter or sister. Shared everything they had, their home, their family, their friends, their vacations, their meals. They taught her practical business skills that helped her land her first marketplace job. But the most important thing they shared was themselves, their time, their counsel, their love, the truth that Jesus redeems, restores, heals, and forgives. And it's this powerful combination of friendship and love, all rooted in Jesus, that healed the broken young woman from the inside out. She was healed from bitterness and hatred and shame. And these were replaced with that which is far more powerful, everlasting friendship, rooted in genuine love. Mm. And you might have guessed by now, that girl is me, right? So not maybe the ideal way that someone would suggest life start, but it's the story of so many people, certainly from my generation, and I think increasingly today. And so I wanted to share a little bit more with you to kind of pull apart some of those bullet points, because I think one of the first times I really heard the Lord speak to me in a clear way, right? Not the audible voice way, but that very inner thought where you know it's not from you. Mm-hmm. Driving, I'm a Spanaway girl. So Julie, in the backyard, I grew up going to my aunt and uncle's house in Stillicum. I know well. Yeah. So I was driving down, I was about 19, driving down South Tacoma Way, which is like driving down the north part of Aurora, to give some context. And I passed this woman who was clearly a prostitute. And I don't remember now what thought went through my mind, but something kind of like, oh, sick, disgusting. And the immediate thing I heard was, but, without my grace, that would be you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? Go talk to her. Your story is her story. Mm. And that just hit, that was just, like, it literally kind of took my breath away. Right? So what is grace? Our stories of grace. It's unmerited favor. Mm-hmm. Why was I born, like, messed up parents, but they did love me? Why did I get to grow up going to my aunt's house where she spoke the gospel at all times, but really never used words? Wow. When I said I was curious about God, it was because I saw something different in her, right? And that sparked my curiosity. And so I had in this deeper part of me, I had this curiosity, like, there has to be more, but what is the more? And why did I happen to be someone who then ended up with neighbors moving in across the street who were about 10 years older than me? And for whatever reason, they trusted me as a 12, 13, 14-year-old and would let me come take care of their baby. Tyler, imagine handing your 6-week-old baby over to a 12 or 13-year-old. Not gonna happen. Not gonna happen. Do it. They let me babysit their 6-week-old. And now as a parent, that blows my mind. It's normal at the time, but I do not think it's normal. But they love Jesus. And they just let me be with them, right? They didn't have a big plan of, we're going to sit down and, study these scriptures. They just let me be with them. And they've rubbed off on me. like literally, I think their cells, like their family cells just shed on me and blessed me. You know, why did I end up being the one who happened to be invited to a Young Life camp? That was the first time I ever heard the gospel. And I was like, oh, that makes, for some people, it's this big emotional thing, right? It wasn't for me. It was, oh, these are the pieces, the puzzle pieces I've been trying to put together. I get it. I'm in. I had no idea what that meant, but I knew it was significant. Mm-hmm. I had other people who did, you know, who helped me build out that framework of what does that mean. So I think the other piece I have to tell you, and it is that love covers a multitude of sin. And I think as I can literally look back from the time I was born until I was stable, and now too, but it when you come from even having been well loved by my parents, when you have that kind of stuff happening in your household, it's very disruptive and the wounds are very deep. And it's not just going to camp or having a counselor. It takes a body of people. It doesn't all have to be one body at the same time, but it takes time for something to heal. It takes a number of years. And it took me a number. I mean, I'm not gonna say I've arrived anywhere. I think it's just deeper in and further still. It's that C.S. Lewis line, deeper in and further still. Where as we grow closer and closer and closer to Jesus, we're healed more and more. And that's not right in us sheds off, and we might not even know it. So I think the big story of God's grace and healing and redemption, where I really do believe that anything can be redeemed and restored. Anything. Yeah. And I have, it's tied to this book here, right? The book is a Bible, but this particular one has a story. So one of the great things about not growing up in a family of believers is that when you first experience Jesus, it's so exciting. And you take everything at face value. And like there's just no, I mean, you know what it's like when it's your first time with something, it's just so exciting. So it was exciting and new and fresh. And I just believed things. And so I believe that if I prayed for my dad to come to know Jesus, that he would. And I kind of thought it would happen soon. And so I did. And I got this free Bible because like I had no money, right? So it was Christmas time. I was given this free Bible. Like, is it so 80s, isn't it? Really in vogue now. And my dad is in jail for selling cocaine. And I give him this Bible for Christmas. Okay. And at that time, I really thought, you have to keep in mind, I was like 17, right? Maybe it was 19. I really thought that by giving my dad this Bible, that he would read it and then that he would kind of suddenly like just come to know Jesus. This is what I thought. And somewhere along the way, as the years rolled by, I really was very faithful in the newness of my belief. I was very faithful to regularly pray for him. And somewhere along the way, as my faith matured, I quit praying for him. And honestly, I gave up. I gave up. Like our relationship was healed. My dad actually died a few years ago of cancer, but there was so much healing and redemption in our relationship. I wish he could be on today. You'd all love him. But he had his own tragic childhood, and he had his own tragic childhood that was not healed when he became a parent. So he did the best that he could, but it was a little messy. But love covers a multitude of sins. Anyhow, my dad gets cancer. There was a whole process there. And in the midst of that, my big concern was like, oh my gosh, like there's no interest in anything faith related. Suddenly, 20 years later, I'm suddenly like, oh, I got to pray for my dad. But I actually kind of can't, because I actually have given up that hope. I gave it up years ago, not intentionally. There wasn't a moment in time. It just slowly happened. But I'd given up that hope that my dad actually might come to faith and come to know Jesus. And I had some friends who came to me and they said, okay, Alexis, we're praying your dad into the kingdom. And I was kind of like, I literally thought, okay, that's nice. I didn't say this because we don't really say this stuff out loud, right? But inside I thought, that's nice. Good on you. But I don't really believe it. Mm-hmm. And then a couple weeks later, one of them came to me and said, Alexis, I have to tell you that I feel like the Lord wants me to let you know that he's going to give you a sign that your dad is in his hands, and that he will be like, you don't need to worry about it. It's all going to be fine. He's going to be in the kingdom. It's like, oh, thank you, Bonnie. But so much sarcasm on the inside. And I'm supposed to be a mature woman of faith now, right? But no. And literally that day, I got an SOS call saying like, oh, your dad's doing really bad. It might be the end. You need to come. He was dying of lung cancer. Like, there are so many ups and downs when you're walking a road like that with someone. There were multiple calls like that along the way. This was the first one. So it's like, I dropped everything that second and left to drive. He lived in Olympia at the time. I drove down. When I got there, he was literally sitting up at the kitchen table eating Lucky Charms. So I was like, okay, probably not dying today since we're eating Lucky Charms. But on the drive home, I'm driving home, and in the front of me is this just pitch dark sky. I mean, just the blackest clouds you can imagine. And behind me is sunshine. And I see this faint rainbow come across, and I think to myself, just inside, but Holy Spirit lives inside us, right? I think to myself, and by the way, I have to say, with what I'm about to tell you, if I'd not experienced this myself, if I heard someone else saying this, I might think they were a little nuts. So since we're family, I'll let you think might be a little nuts. See this faint rainbow, and on the inside, I think, I'll believe, I'm like, ha, that's God's sign to me that my friend has just told me that he's going to give me. But I'll believe that's the sign if right now it goes to the most brilliant rainbow ever. And it did. In a nanosecond, I had all my hairs on my body standing up. I was like, pinch, pinch. Did that just happen? So here's the amazing thing. For the next 3 months, as my dad was dying, every time I drove down to see him, there was a rainbow.
Wow.
I kid you not, every single time.
Wow.
2 times, and I have witnesses to this, 2 times, my husband and kids were in the car, and I had on these awesome Ray-Ban sunglasses that had a really great polarized lens. 2 times. We lived in West Seattle. We're coming across the West Seattle Bridge. I'm like, look at the rainbow. They're like, there is no rainbow. I'm like, there's a big rainbow right there. Like, no, it's not. I'm like, yes, there is. Somehow with my polarized lenses, twice I could see it before they could.
Wow.
And then it lit up. They thought I was a little crazy for about 10 seconds till twice they saw the rainbow. and anyhow, in the middle of all that, I think the peace the Lord showed me was that I thought my dad was a spiritual paralytic, but in this area, I was a spiritual paralytic. And my friends, when I could not the very thing I wanted that I could not anymore hope for or believe. My friends carried my dad and I to the feet of Jesus.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Right. They did.
Yeah.
4 days before my dad died, when he could barely talk, because we had been having conversations, he said to me, Alexis, well, it wasn't even that. Like literally, he could so barely talk. I had to get my ear down to his lips. And he did he said, the thing we've been talking about, I want to pray. Okay, in my mind, if this ever happened, it was going to happen just the two of us in a quiet place. This really was the day where everybody came. We all got the SOS call. Dad wants you to come today. Kids running around there, like 30 people. That part of my family is just, it's chaos when we're together. The room's loud. Everybody's there. I can barely hear him. We're kind of, in the middle of it all. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to pray right now in public. So I grab his hand. I've been well trained now that I've been in the family for a long time. You bow your head when you pray, right? My dad knows nothing. He pokes me in the, with his fingers and does this. So I look in his eyes. I have no idea what I said. I was bawling. But at the end, my dad said, did you see the golden glow hovering above us? So, there's a veil between this world and forever. And I think my dad saw something because he's approaching forever. So about a month after he died at home in his house. So I go down to see my stepmom, and she's like, Alexis, I want to give you back something you gave to your dad for Christmas. And I was like, okay, but I'm thinking that's kind of funny, but okay. So we go into their bedroom, and she opens his dresser drawer and rummages around and pulls out this. And when she pulled it out, I thought that looks vaguely familiar, but not that familiar. And I just took it at the time and said, okay, thanks. So when I got home that day, I opened it up. Dad, Merry Christmas, 1991. My biggest hope and prayer for you is that someday Jesus will become as important to you as he is to me. I love you very much, Alexis. So as we think, like literally, like the redemption in the book, because of Jesus. But in this book, I felt like the Lord was like, Lord, thank you for reminding me that you do not forget that which we pray for. When I was not faithful to remembering it, he was. He does not disappoint. He does not let us down. We lose sight of things. It may take years for us to see something happen. It might not be in our lifetime. But those genuine, like 19-year-old Alexis praying for those things, there was an innocence and a purity to that maybe doesn't exist now. And it was like, God honored that. He so honored that. So I just wanted to share these stories of grace with you today, really honestly thinking about the next generation. Right? And I'm probably preaching to the choir here. As I look around, right? We are people who care about the emerging generation. I just think my encouragement too is really spoken out of my own life. Yes, pray, but I also think like who might you be encountering who like you just, people need to look. Yes, prayer, yes. And maybe even more so, it's the rubbing off, right? We rub off onto people as we spend time with them. The incarnate Jesus, we get to pray, and we get to be his hands and feet. And sometimes the most beautiful things come out of the quantity of time. We never know when the moment is going to happen, when, you know, it's the word, the 3 words that come out of your mouth, because you've logged a ton of time, and it's those 3 words in that moment, or that thing that happens that maybe you laugh over or you cry over, or just some random thing that pops up in conversation. I think especially with young people, I'm not a believer in that, oh, you just need quality time. No, quality comes out of quantity. The quality comes out of quantity. And so, I mean, as I think about this emerging generation and just what I experienced, I honestly can look back now and go, it's not that I would recommend it for anyone, but I'm so grateful for it. I'm so grateful for it. I don't really think I'd change anything, because I've encountered Jesus in such a powerful way, but I encountered him in such a powerful way, first and foremost, through other people like you. And I cannot, like, I look at myself, I'm like, I don't have any magic tricks or anything special that will change someone, except we kind of sort of do. Because as we spend time with people, that is loving people, right? Just be. And it can be like, hey, I'm going to the grocery store. Like, this is literally how I was revived, right? I didn't know I needed it. They were discipling me. Like, we throw that word around. I think it can be kind of scary. Like, oh, I need to have this big plan and this big Bible study. And those are all great things. But it can also just be, hey, let's just be together, right? That's when I look at Jesus, they were together. And then we see the quality moments. Like, that's what the scripture's recording, the quality that came out of the quantity. So I loved that we were praying for youth today. I think of them and what like, they just face so much more than I did. So many more hard and difficult things that they have to think about and wrestle with, and things that are in their faces that I didn't. And I know that 19-year-old Alexis would have needed you all. Right? I really would have, still do. But I just want to encourage you that you have a lot to give. You have so much to give. And I literally looked up the college enrollments as we were praying for the UW. There are 42,500 undergrads on that campus, right? 42,500. Then I quickly, calculated the total of the other universities, 65,000 undergraduates. I think of the number of people it took to pour into me. Like, let's be praying for laborers, for people who are willing to give their life away. I know that the people who invested so heavily in me, they're like, oh, Alexis, you were easy. I kind of am not so convinced of that. But somehow God stretched their time. Like they would leave me in charge of their 3 girls. I was 19 years old, and they would go back, like, oh, we have to go back to the National Prayer Breakfast and do ABC. And like, I started out with a few hours, then it was a day, then it was an overnight, then they could trust me. Then it was like, oh, we're going to be gone. The longest would be 10 days. And I literally, I was their sister daughter. And those 2 years of absorbing Jesus through them literally healed me from the inside out. So my life is a story of God's grace and unmerited favor, because I do not deserve it any more I think there is a love gap that I got something that maybe that prostitute that I passed on south to come away, who was probably my age, I got something she didn't. And I didn't deserve it. And I used to try to figure out the why. And I finally realized the why is just the surrender of, okay, Lord, I want to serve and give my life away like was given away to me. So thank you for listening.
Amen. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I had this wonderful image. I usually just limit myself to one chosen reference per time, but image of the bringing the paralytic to Jesus, you know, and we do that for our friends and other people. People do it for us, and it's not discipling, right, in our magic or our powers, but just bringing people to his feet, right?
Exactly.
Or breaking through the roof when it's messy, right?
Yeah, it is messy. And then when you've had the experience of being brought to the feet of Jesus by other people, now I'm like, okay, what's impossible for you to believe? I got your back, right? We can do that with people. We can do that with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also invited Michael Wimmer and Hans Eriksson to show up, and they texted me last night, said, cool, Alexis is awesome, but we're having our move-in at the UW house, can't be there tomorrow.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We will share the recording with them. And Alexis, thank you so much for just that beautiful testimony of God's grace. And I so resonated with what you shared in terms of just giving up on your dad, because I have some family members who don't know Jesus, and one in particular who's particularly hostile. And I was at a conference in Colorado back in July, and it's called the Billion Soul Harvest, and we had people from all over the globe there, international prayer leaders and folks, and they were sharing how they had been in country praying for their people and trying to do this evangelism, and they were just getting nowhere. And so they stopped doing all the things they were doing, and they just started to pray. And how God literally just had these breakthroughs for them. And I don't know if they said this or if it's something that the Lord just put in my mind, was there's no such thing as a closed country.
That's right.
And then he just put it on my heart. There's no such thing as a closed heart. And on that, in the middle of July, God reignited in me prayer for my family because I had given up. And I hope you guys would maybe join me in praying for some family members of mine. And so anyway,
I would love to believe for that with you.
Thank you.
And I would add, here's I think one of the things that the Lord showed me related to my dad and people who don't know him. There's a part of most people that do know him, I think, but they might not know the source. Right? So my dad his life was being transformed along the way through people and life maturity. And there was a lot of goodness that was being birthed out of him. He didn't know the source of the goodness, right? So that's what I started praying, was that he would be able to come to recognize and understand by name the source, because all goodness is right. All goodness is from God. Just started praying like that he would be able to identify by name the source of the goodness.
Yeah.
And that is Jesus. It's God's Spirit. So what are your family members' names?
I have one younger sister who loves Jesus, and then I have two older sisters, Melissa and Melanie.
Melissa and Melanie. Okay.
Yep.
We might be in it for the long haul.
Thank you. And then pray for my mom who lives with one of my sisters, and my mom, has faithfully come to church with me for many years, but we're just continuing to pray for her and for health, because she hasn't been able to come to church for a while. So, and her name's Shirley.
Thank you.
Alexis, I really appreciate what you shared, and we have similar stories. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
And this applies to what Garrick just said as well, as I believe. Alexis, how often does it happen that somebody says your name and then something in the kitchen starts talking?
Oh, well, that's why we call our devices Echo.
I need to make that change. But I have found that, and we want to be working and praying, and I have a lot of friends because of my journey that have shared with me their journey. And I think if you earnestly pray for those family members, I really believe God's not going to let those prayers go to waste. They are going to find a way, and it may be through some anonymous visitation pastor. It's like, wait a second, why didn't I get the opportunity? Or it might be on that last breath at the bed where you could tell things change, but it will happen.
I completely agree.
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
I got to share, I'm drinking from my Kanye cup today, so I hope everybody can appreciate that my words are more solemnly spoken. This is a good cup of Joe right here.
Okay, there's one other piece I have to tell you really, really quickly, related to marketplace, because this is you all, right? As I was thinking about this, I was like, I know they're friends, but they're kind of like marketplace leader dudes, and it's pretty personal. Especially Mason. But okay, here's to thinking about the history of this group. Okay, so my parents were pretty successful quite young. Financially, they on paper they were they were very successful, and they nosedived. So they had a commercial landscaping business. They landscaped most of Tacoma, Steilacoom, Lakewood in the 80s. And that is the era that my dad became a cocaine addict. So I'm at his office one day, and I'm sitting at his desk, and there's this letter from this guy named Glenn Ash. Does that name ring a bell for anybody? No. Prominent businessman in Tacoma, owned a bunch of car lots, kind of like the Jerry Corum of 70s and 80s, right? Okay, so there's a letter from Glenn Ash. I wish I had it. I remember reading it. I was probably 15 or 16. And it said, Rick, that's my dad's name. It's been a pleasure, working with you in these different areas. Wanted to let you know that it seems like something has shifted in your life. I meet with this group of men every Thursday morning at 6 a.m. and we pray for business leaders. You are welcome to join us. We just want you to know we care about you. We care about your family. We're praying for you every week. These men, I found out later that these men prayed for my dad for years. Okay, they prayed for him. Okay, gratitude always makes me cry. All right, getting a little weepy. These businessmen prayed for my dad in the season of his life when nobody, including me, wanted anything to do with him.
Wow.
Right? I literally, in that season, I remember thinking, it was so crazy. I literally remember thinking, I wish my dad would kind of die, because that sounds easier than dealing with this forever and ever. I'm so glad that did not happen. But my dad was so strung out, he really could have died in a ditch, right? Like truly. Why do I even remember reading that? I believe that those men faithfully praying for my dad, they were the spiritual bridge. So men, your history, and women too, but this has been a group of mostly men. be encouraged. Be encouraged that your roles in the marketplace really matter.
Mm.
Alexis, it's interesting. You haven't mentioned your mother once. Tell us a little bit about that relationship. Is your
my mom's awesome.
The grandmother for Gavin and
yeah, her name's Karen. Yeah, her name's Karen. Here, I'll show you. She's awesome. I talk to her all the time. We were at the Puyallup Fair a few nights ago, my mom and my daughter. And we did, I've always wanted to do one of those caricatures my whole life. We finally did it. So that's my mom.
Oh, that's
Caricature
wonderful.
form. It's pretty good of her though.
So spiritually, how has she been
She's
a part
good.
of this transition?
Yeah,
Especially
so,
when you lived with somebody else. And then tell us a little bit about Saint Troy.
right. He is a saint. Yeah. So my mom, I love dearly. My mom's one of my heroes. I don't, with what I'm about to say, it's not political commentary. It's very personal commentary. But in the era that I was born, you were not a single mom. You either, at the time you could just legally abort or you put your baby up for adoption. You were not a single mother. My mom lived in this blows my mind. My mom was 19. She went to live in a Catholic home for unwed mothers where you hid away. Mm-hmm. Then you birthed your baby was adopted, and then you re-entered society like nothing happened. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was born and my mom said, nope, I'm not putting my baby up for adoption. My dad had just left for Vietnam. And he just graduated from high school. So my mom, she made arrangements with my dad's parents to take care of me for the first 6 weeks of my life. And during that time, she went out, got a job, got her first month's paycheck, got an apartment, and then went and got me. And then mom's family was like, oh, she's really serious about this. And then they came around. My grandpa, it's a story for another time. My mom's dad was really like my dad. So my mom is she's my hero. She never took a penny of government assistance of any kind. She modeled self-sacrifice. Like we got new things, she didn't. So she's my hero. And Saint Troy, my mom raised me to be independent. She was very successful at that. So Saint Troy, I'm learning interdependence. So Troy is a saint. For 20 years, we're still working on that piece. And I have to say hello, Rich. I hear tons about you.
Hi.
Rich shared his story last week.
And no, I missed it. I wanted to be there, but couldn't. So
good. So good.
Anybody else? Thoughts, comments? People to pray for?
I did want to share another cool prayer story related to family. My brother passed away before Christmas, but he had two sons, and they kind of had a rough upbringing with a single mom, and they would come and stay regularly at my parents' house when I was 16 and 18 when they were born. And they would come and stay with us. And I was a baby Christian myself. And you talk about those prayers that you pray, and I remember specifically them laying on a mattress on the floor and just praying over them, and just trusting God with their lives. And both of them love Jesus today. One's in the military and one works for the government. And not that they don't have challenges because of, like you were saying, all the healing that is still taking place. But it was just really cool to remember that. And I shared that with them recently, that because God just brought that memory back. It's been, 40 years or so. And just those prayers, God does, he never forgets them. And so thank you, Alexis, for just sharing such a beautiful testimony of how faithful God is.
Yeah.
Pleasure. And Tyler, I'm wondering if you'll let me get my hands on your 6-week-old. I'm only kind of kidding. I love babies.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, come on over and meet him. But you may have to play catch in the backyard a little bit too.
That's okay.
I'll have to hold him.
I can do that.
Okay, sounds good.
I just really like the faith of like planting that seed in your dad by giving him that Bible so long ago and praying that prayer, and just kind of after a while putting your hands up and being like, I don't know. And then at the end, for him to carry that Bible around and have it in his nightstand, it was like a seed was continually being planted until it went through that, tilled that hard soil until it was able to plant and produce, and like, we never know. I think we want instant gratification to say, hey, I did that prayer and why didn't it work? But we never know that on God's timing, it's going to produce those fruits. And it's just such a testimony that you never know the seeds that you're planting and down the line, how they've gained root and produce fruit in someone's life that we will never see. And it's so cool when God gives us that glimpse that you get to see the end results of those seeds that we've planted.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So well said. And here's the piece I learned afterwards. I was blown away by, after my dad died, hearing, so many people say, oh yeah, like I'd had conversations with your dad about Jesus, or I was praying for him. The neighbor who kept coming over when I was there trying to spend time with my dad, I found it so annoying. I'm like, oh, they're full-on believers, and they're literally, intentionally coming over to pray for him. I was annoyed by it. It's like, shows you how, like, stuff. So but that, like, I think the point is, just like there were so many people pouring into me, there were so many people doing the same for my dad, right? So it's I think also, like, the Lord just really showed me in that, like, hey, I work through everybody and a whole bunch of people you would never expect. Because some of the people who were praying for my dad, I was like, I had no idea that they had any faith at all. And on the surface, their lives are a hot mess. Somehow, but God used them.
Yeah.
So it was such a reminder to me of, here I'm seeing, mature woman of faith. I was like, we all have degrees of mess, and in God's grace, we get to be part of stories.
Yeah, so true. I just have to share a really quick story. We had a babysitter when my girls were like 2 and 4, and I had forgotten this completely, that we had given her a Bible. My husband had written in the front. We had sent her to a Young Life camp, and that was in Bellevue, and then we moved down to Tacoma, and so never, I completely forgot about it, to be honest. And years later, so probably about 18, 20 years later, we were up in Bellevue. We were trying to have a family night. We were going to that bowling alley that's in Bellevue. And there were some bouncers on the outside of I guess it was transitioning to where you had to be 21 or older to go into this bowling alley. And so we're like, okay, well, that didn't work. And all of a sudden, one of the bouncers goes, Julie Dilly, is that you? Is that you? And here she was 20 years later. She'd become a single mom herself, had two boys. And she said, Julie, I still have your Bible, and that camp you sent me to, I've now raised my boys to love Jesus. I'm the only one still in my family that loves Jesus. Like, so it was so amazing. I felt so blessed that the Lord would let us even, peek into that, nor, understand that how he used that one little thing, giving her a Bible and helping to send her to a camp. So to your point, Rich and Alexis, like, you just never know what little seed you can completely forget about it, that the Lord's going to use and grow. So it's encouraging me to get back to handing out getting more Bibles in the hands of some of the youth, right, that don't go to church and that, we run into. So thank you for your story and your encouragement, and it was really a great morning. Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Alexis, can you share a little bit about your kids? I don't know how much you want to share, but how can we be praying for them?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, so Gavin is 19, moving towards 20. He graduated from high school and was faithful to do what he said he would do from the time he was 13 or 14. He went into the Marines. So,
Hey.
yay. And Mom, wide-eyed, gosh, buckle up. But he did go in as a reservist. So he's just somewhat recently back from his year of training. And if I ever tell you he's been called up, then we know something really has gone awry in the world, because in theory, reservists, you don't want them to be called up. And he's now at Bellevue College, just with this first week there. So this is his second year out of high school. And then Angela is a senior in high school. And I would say she's kind of she is representative of many millions of teens in her age range right now who are really struggling with anxiety and depression, completely exacerbated in COVID. So we're getting some extra scaffolding around her besides just mom and dad, and she seems to be doing a lot better and has hope. This is the big thing, hope for the future. I'm amazed when I listen to young people that the huge deficit is hope.
Yeah.
Really strong. And if you don't have hope, you're going to be pretty depressed and have a whole bunch of anxiety.
Yeah.
Alexis, can you tell us just a little bit about the family that you babysat for, that you were pretty kind of assimilated into? Maybe even who they are, we probably know them.
Yeah, totally. I should have said their names. Yeah, Jim and Becky Brown. Anybody know them?
I've heard the name.
Yeah, okay, so Jim was the regional director of Young Life in the early 90s. And they led a student movement of really college students also in the 90s, focusing on what does it mean to live out your faith in the context of the marketplace. And so I lived with their family, and then they moved overseas and spent 20 years overseas. And then when my husband and I were new, like, they so let me be part of their family that when Troy and I had been married a couple years, and when I was pregnant with Gavin, we went and lived with them in England for a year. Wow. Kind of crazy. So literally she saw Gavin before I did, because she was our doula.
Alexis,
yeah.
I was going to ask you, how in those years when you were growing up, how did you work through all the trauma and different things? I know the Lord obviously was your rock, but did Young Life mature your faith? Like, how did your faith mature through that?
Yeah, certainly. There were so many parts. So Young Life was definitely, my Young Life leaders were kind of my rock.
Okay.
Grandparents are really wonderful, amazing people. And I spent a ton of time with them. I have a very stable extended family. So kind of my situation, my immediate family was really messy, but the rest of my family really stable. So I think when you have a lot of other stability, you know, places where you can be in 10 minutes if things are crazy at home, that, you know, your boat's rocking some, but you don't capsize. So I had the good scaffolding around me. And I think those foundational underpinnings really did start for me with Young Life. And I have the best leaders. They're still my friends today.
That's awesome.
Right. So they were at that there were 6 of them, very faithful at that high school for years.
Who are some of those leaders? Again, there might be people we know.
Pollyann Butler, who is Becky Brown's sister. That's how I ended up meeting. So my Young Life leader introduced me to her brother and sister, her sister and brother-in-law. And those are the people who had me live with them. And then I was just so fortunate to be around honestly really great people who knew a lot more about walking with Jesus than me. And I think I was very heavily discipled without knowing I was being discipled. And it was through, so you have to show, this is what I would say, you can't imagine something you've not seen before. So even really creative people have seen something that they've been able to springboard their creativity off of, right? So you can imagine a flower that doesn't exist in the world because you've seen other flowers. If there was no flower, we would never be able to think of a flower. Right. So I had the context of family, but I had no idea about, like, how would you live out faith with your family in an immediate family? I didn't know. I didn't have it modeled in any way, like at all. I have 2 memories of going into a church with my parents. It was for weddings. We went to other weddings. They weren't at churches. So there was nothing. And so living in a household showed me how to operate in a different way. Right? So that was really, really foundational. And then once I had those underpinnings, then I could pursue things on my own.
Thank you.
You know, we think of, we raise our kids and we pray for our kids. Sometimes it goes the other way too, right? You got to raise your parents and pray for your parents and get them to mature. And reminds me of early in the year, we had Rod Hanley come, and then Sherman Smith, who was in the movie Show Me the Father. And, you know, Rod had to help his father. And in those last days, when they get close to the end, something special happens. They open up, they see things, they hear things. And they got that blessing that they should have had earlier, right? Father's blessing.
It's interesting. I think too, like I was not unloved by my dad. Like my dad actually really loved me and really loved my brother. He just had, like, he grew up in a foster home. His mom was a total barfly. He grew up in a foster home, and he was beat. They took him to church all the time and would beat the crap out of him. Like, no wonder why he wanted nothing to do with any kind of faith at all. He was abused in that context. But he did glean something, which was treat others the way you want to be treated. So he said, as a dad, he would always try to stop and think, how did I want to be treated as a kid? And then he would act. And My brother and I reaped the benefit. Like if you apply principles of Jesus to your life, whether or not you follow him, you are following him. And that blessing ripples out to others.
Yeah.
Right? And so we were loved, but then things just went, because he was so broken on the inside, he could only keep it together for so long. And then, like, literally, kids would come and knock on our door. I have memories of kids knocking on our door and me answering the door at like 7, 8, 9, 10. And the kids saying, "Can Rick come out and play?" Rick was my dad. Rick would go out and play. Rick was the only dad out playing. Why did my dad do that? Because he wanted adults to play with him as a kid. So he did. Even in the midst of that abusive situation, that piece of truth nestled in. My brother and I didn't find that piece out until years. I mean, I experienced it. I didn't know that piece until many years later. But that explained a lot to me. So
wow.
Yeah,
good. Hey, for time's sake, I'm going to draw a line here, and we'll pause the recording too.